A brilliant professor sets out to humiliate Elon Musk in front of a packed lecture hall, only to realize she's just challenged a mathematical mind beyond her own. As equations fly and reputations teeter on the edge, one shocking revelation threatens everything she thought she knew. But what secret was Elon hiding, and why was he really there? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. Professor Linda Martinez stood before the mirror in her campus office, adjusting the collar of her blazer with quiet precision. Her expression, calm but intense, masked the adrenaline humming beneath her skin. Today wasn't just another lecture. It was the culmination of weeks of planning, an academic reckoning aimed squarely at one of the world's most worshipped entrepreneurs, Elon Musk. To her students, it was another lively session of Math and Society, her celebrated course that explored the intersection of numbers, culture, and power. But to Linda, it was something deeper, a mission to challenge the myth of the self-made genius. As she gathered her notes and her laptop, she glanced once more at the equations on her whiteboard, the centerpiece of her plan. A brutally complex rocket trajectory calculus problem, lifted and twisted from graduate-level aerospace textbooks. She'd designed it not just to stump her students, but to make a point. One she'd been sharpening ever since the university invited her to speak at an upcoming TEDx event on demystifying genius. At 42, Linda Martinez had built a reputation for being both brilliant and unflinching. She wasn't afraid to question narratives that placed men like Musk on pedestals. In her eyes, stories of overnight tech success often obscured a deeper truth: connections, privilege, access, the invisible scaffolding behind most high-profile triumphs. And today, she intended to dismantle that illusion, right in front of 150 eager students. The lecture hall buzzed with anticipation. Word had spread across campus. Professor Martinez was going to take on Elon Musk. Some students joked about it, others were genuinely curious. A few fanboys in SpaceX hoodies had already claimed front row seats. Linda arrived 5 minutes late, intentionally. She liked the subtle power play of making them wait, of owning the moment before she even spoke a word. "Sorry I'm late," she said briskly, not sorry at all. She placed her coffee on the podium and tapped her laptop. The projector hummed to life, illuminating the giant screen behind her with a photograph of Elon Musk, standing next to a Falcon 9 rocket, his infamous half-smirk fixed on the crowd. "Today," Linda began, pacing slowly across the stage, "we're going to talk about the illusion of genius, and how power, money, and timing often masquerade as raw intellect." Murmurs swept through the room. A few phones were lifted discreetly into recording mode. "This man," she said, tapping the screen behind her, "has been called a visionary, a genius, even the next Einstein. But is he? Or has he simply mastered the art of being in the right place, at the right time, with the right resources?" She clicked again. Now the screen showed a younger Elon beside his first car, grinning awkwardly. He had wealthy parents, access to elite education, government subsidies for his companies, and yes, he hired brilliant engineers. But does he understand the math, the physics, the code? Another click. A slide filled with stock charts, loan figures, and excerpts from critical op-eds. "And that brings us to today's challenge," Linda continued, moving to the whiteboard. With dramatic flair, she uncapped a marker and began writing a calculus problem that spanned half the board. Vectors, integrals, and nested functions in Greek symbols sprawled across the space. "This," she said, stepping back, "is a problem derived from real rocket science, specifically optimizing fuel burn over variable atmospheric density during launch, the kind of thing Musk's engineers deal with. Now, who would like to try solving it?" A hush fell over the room. Even the students in math-heavy majors sat frozen. No one moved. "Anyone?" she asked again, a smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Because this, my friends, is not the kind of thing you can bluff your way through. This takes years of specialized education and experience. You can't fake genius on a whiteboard. In the back row, a man in a plain gray t-shirt and a worn baseball cap shifted in his seat. He raised his hand. Linda blinked, surprised. She shielded her eyes slightly against the overhead lights to get a better look. "Yes," she called out. The man stood up. "I'll give it a try." His voice was calm, steady. He moved slowly toward the front, students parting for him like a wave. Most assumed he was an older grad student. A few glanced at one another, raising eyebrows. "What's your name?" Linda asked. He kept his eyes low. "Just call me E," he said with a small, unreadable smile. Linda raised an eyebrow. "All right, E. Have you studied calculus before?" "A little," he replied, taking the marker from her hand. She stepped aside, arms crossed, confident. No matter how brave this man was, the equation would defeat him. But as the man began to write, something strange happened. The marker didn't pause. It moved with speed, precision, and authority. And in the first row, a student's eyes widened in recognition. All eyes locked on the man in the baseball cap as he stepped up to the whiteboard. The moment had shifted, subtly at first, then unmistakably. Linda Martinez, arms still folded, narrowed her eyes. He hadn't hesitated. That was odd. Most students would have at least glanced at their peers nervously or fumbled with the marker. But this one, this E, handled it like he belonged there, like he owned the board. He studied the equation she had written, nodding slightly to himself. It was a beast of a problem. Linda had crafted it not just to be difficult, but impossible for anyone outside the field. A test of deep theoretical understanding layered with practical rocket science applications, optimal fuel burn, air density shifts at altitude, and nonlinear thrust decay curves. Even some aerospace engineers would have paused, but he didn't. The marker squeaked as he began, not in fits and starts, not with uncertain strokes or hesitant scribbles, but with fluid motion, each step unfolding with surgical precision. Integrals were balanced, partial derivatives slipped into place, adjustments made to the core assumptions. Students leaned forward, wide-eyed. Some began recording. 3 rows from the front, a girl whispered to her friend, "He's not guessing. He knows what he's doing." Linda stepped slightly closer. Her pulse quickened, just a little. She wasn't worried, not yet. She told herself that sometimes students got lucky, followed familiar patterns, mimicked known solutions. Maybe he was bluffing. But something in her gut said no. This wasn't mimicry, this was mastery. And then came the moment that changed everything. He paused, not because he was stuck, but because he saw something, a subtle error in her original setup. Linda's stomach dipped. "Your problem works," he said quietly, turning to glance at her for the first time. His eyes were calm, kind, but unmistakably sharp. "But it loses about 15% fuel efficiency in the upper atmosphere. If you factor in mixture shift and adjust the nozzle expansion ratio here." He turned back to the board and wrote a second, alternative solution beneath the first. The lecture hall was silent. Not quiet. Silent. No pens tapping, no whispering, no movement. Even the buzzing of the projector seemed to have faded into the background. The only sound was the marker tracing a line through a revised set of variables, an elegant fix that reduced drag losses and improved trajectory control. When he handed the marker back to Linda, he did so with a slight nod, as if he'd just submitted a group project, not dismantled her carefully orchestrated narrative in front of 150 witnesses. Linda didn't move. She stared at the whiteboard. Her own equation, challenging, nuanced, built to prove a point, now stood dwarfed beneath his cleaner, more efficient version. He hadn't just solved the problem, he'd improved it. From the front row, a student, one wearing a SpaceX hoodie, suddenly gasped. He leaned over his laptop, typing furiously. Then he looked up, eyes wide, and blurted, "Wait a second, that's Elon Musk." The words exploded like a firecracker. A wave of noise surged through the room. Students rose from their seats. Phones shot into the air. The steady hum of awe turned to a roar of disbelief. Elon Musk? No way, is it really him? Can I get a selfie? Linda's eyes darted back to the man, Elon Musk, who was now calmly stepping away from the board, adjusting the bill of his cap. She felt the blood drain from her face. It was true, she saw it now. The unmistakable profile, the sharp jawline, the piercing intelligence in his gaze. Hidden behind the casual disguise was the very man she'd built an entire lecture to critique. And he had just unraveled her argument, not with bombast, but with math. "Everyone, please return to your seats," she barked, her voice cracking with urgency. "Phones down, no more photos." The chaos continued. Some students scrambled toward Elon, others stood frozen, their entire worldview rearranging itself in real time. Linda's control over the room had evaporated in an instant. She turned to Elon, who stood quietly near the edge of the whiteboard, eyes lowered in modest discomfort as a dozen cameras pointed in his direction. "I'm sorry," he said so softly only she could hear. "I wasn't trying to cause a scene, I just saw the equation and couldn't resist." Linda's throat tightened. This was not how today was supposed to go. And deep down, a quiet question began to gnaw at her. Had she completely misjudged him? The room was still buzzing with energy, and the echoes of disbelief hadn't fully settled when Linda Martinez, usually so composed, found herself gripping the edge of the lectern for balance. Her heart was racing, not just from embarrassment, but from the sheer unreality of it all. Elon Musk, the very subject of her lecture, the centerpiece of her case against mythologized genius, was not only in her classroom, but had just solved her most advanced calculus problem in front of her students, and he had done it without breaking a sweat. He wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to know that. And yet, here he was. Linda took a shaky breath and tried to reclaim control. "Mr. Musk," she began, voice taut, "I have to say, this is quite the surprise." Elon shifted his weight, his hands now tucked in the pockets of his jeans, looking simultaneously uncomfortable and unbothered. "First time I've crashed a college lecture," he said with a small smile. "But when I saw those tweets this morning about today's topic, I thought, why not see it for myself?" The crowd of students murmured, many still sneaking photos, their phones peeking from backpacks or half-lowered hands. Linda raised hers to silence them. "Phones away. If you want to stay in this classroom, you're here to learn, not record." Slowly, reluctantly, the phones disappeared. She turned back to Elon. "You came because of the tweets?" "I did," Elon replied, his voice calm but steady. "It's not every day someone tries to publicly dismantle your entire career." Linda flinched at that. "My lecture was about examining the broader forces behind success," she countered, forcing her voice into a tone of academic neutrality. "Privilege, timing, access, those aren't accusations. They're variables." Elon nodded slowly. "Variables, I understand. I've had advantages, sure, but I've also had to fight to prove I wasn't just some lucky fraud." That landed like a subtle accusation. Linda heard it. So did the students. "Then perhaps," she said carefully, "you'd like to address some of the data I prepared." She walked back to the screen, flipping through the slides that had seemed so airtight an hour ago. Charts showing Tesla's government loans, articles citing his privileged upbringing, diagrams of stock options and venture capital networks. "These," she said, "aren't opinions. They're documented facts. Most people don't get to risk everything and still land on their feet. You did." Elon looked at the projection of his younger self on the screen. Awkward, pale, standing beside his first car. He stared at it for a long moment. "You're right," he said softly. "That part is true. I had safety nets that others didn't. But if you're trying to say that my companies exist because of those safety nets, and not the years of all-nighters, failures, and near bankruptcies, then you're not telling the whole story either." A silence fell again, this one heavier than before, not hostile, but charged. Linda crossed her arms. "So what is the story then? That you taught yourself rocket science just because you could?" Elon raised an eyebrow. Yes. The class reacted audibly, half disbelief, half awe. I read textbooks, I spoke with engineers. I studied orbital mechanics because I needed to understand the physics myself. Not to impress anyone, but because no one else was going to make SpaceX work. Not if I didn't understand the math behind it. Linda's mind reeled. That quiet humility, the firm logic, and the undeniable truth in what he said. Then perhaps, she said slowly, cautiously, we should stop debating and begin a conversation. That line shifted everything. For the first time, Elon smiled, genuinely this time. I'd like that, he said. The students erupted into spontaneous applause. It wasn't loud, but it was earnest, like they knew something rare was unfolding in front of them. Two brilliant minds, two opposing philosophies, suddenly finding common ground. Not in surrender, but in dialogue. Linda turned off the projector. The data could wait, the lecture could wait. Because what was happening now was real learning, a collision of experience and ideology, intellect and instinct. You may be Elon Musk, she said, gesturing for him to join her at the front, but in this classroom, you're a guest speaker, so let's talk. Elon nodded, stepping forward as the two stood side by side, the whiteboard between them, no longer a battleground, but a bridge. And so began the most unexpected seminar of Linda Martinez's career, one that neither she, nor Elon, nor the students would ever forget. The classroom had taken on a surreal stillness, as though time itself had paused to eavesdrop. Professor Linda Martinez and Elon Musk now stood side by side, two titans of intellect from radically different worlds, brought together by coincidence, or perhaps something stranger. Linda cleared her throat and motioned toward a chair near the front of the room. Why don't you have a seat, Mr. Musk? Elon hesitated, then took the chair. His eyes scanned the faces of the students, many of them still visibly stunned. The SpaceX t-shirt guy had his phone clutched in both hands like a relic, unsure if he should ask for an autograph or take notes. So, Linda said, folding her arms again, her voice steadier now, what do you make of my original thesis? That success is more a result of luck and connections than innate genius. Elon tilted his head. I think it's partially true. I've had my share of luck, and yes, I've benefited from opportunities others haven't. But I've also worked harder than anyone I know. I've slept on factory floors, coded through the night, risked everything, multiple times. Is that luck too? Linda didn't answer right away. Her academic training warned her against rhetorical traps, but this wasn't an argument anymore. It was a conversation, and perhaps a necessary one. I don't doubt your work ethic, she said slowly, but in academia, we see brilliant minds overlooked all the time because they didn't have the right passport, the right mentors, or the right bank account to survive the early years. Elon nodded. That's fair. The system isn't equal. But what you do with your advantages, that still matters. The class was silent, leaning in. Linda stepped toward the whiteboard. Let's try something, she said, erasing the rocket fuel equation Elon had so easily demolished. She began sketching a new problem, this time denser, stranger. Equations related to climate modeling, carbon dispersion, and localized turbulence. This, she said, looking over her shoulder at him, is part of my research in climate science. It's theoretical, but I believe it could improve carbon capture systems. Elon stood and studied it. His eyes moved quickly, scanning the flow of logic, recognizing fragments, patterns, some familiar, others novel. You're using a modified turbulence matrix, he murmured, but accounting for variable altitude density. That's clever. Linda blinked, surprised. You recognize it? He nodded. Not this exact model, but I've seen similar ones in atmospheric modeling for closed-loop life support systems at SpaceX. There was a beat of stunned silence between them. You're using turbulence-based modeling for life support? Linda asked. incredulous. "We have to," Elon replied. "Mars has an ultra-thin atmosphere. If we want to survive there, we have to engineer every molecule of breathable air. That means precision gas control, and mathematics like yours could help." Linda's mouth parted slightly, her disbelief slowly giving way to a flicker of something unexpected. Admiration. "I thought my work was too abstract," she admitted. "Too academic to ever be applied." Elon shook his head. "You underestimate yourself. That's one thing I've learned. What seems theoretical today can change the world tomorrow, if it's built on truth." She looked at her own equation again, this time seeing it differently. Not just numbers on a board, but possibility. Elon picked up the marker, hesitated, then added a term. "You're missing a coefficient here. Density fluctuation due to thermal layering. Without it, your model will break down at high altitudes." Linda leaned in, her eyes narrowed, not in skepticism but focus. "You're right." They worked in silence for several moments, scribbling, erasing, refining. It was a duet in chalk and ink, and for the first time that day, Linda wasn't defending her ideas. She was building on them. With someone who saw what she saw. After a few more adjustments, they stepped back and looked at the board together. The equation had transformed. It was elegant, functional, alive. "You just improved a model I've been struggling with for 6 months, she said quietly. "I didn't do it alone," Elon replied. Linda was about to respond when her phone buzzed, a news alert. She opened it absently, then froze. The headline sent a jolt through her spine. "Elon Musk crashes college lecture, solves impossible equation in front of stunned professor." Below it, a blurry photo of Elon standing at her whiteboard. The article was spreading fast. Her students were already scrolling through it. Elon leaned over to look. "That didn't take long." Linda groaned softly. "This was supposed to be a quiet day." "It's never quiet when I show up," he replied with a rueful smile. She gave him a sidelong glance. No kidding. And yet, somewhere beneath her frustration, she didn't feel regret. Not yet. Professor Linda Martinez stared at her phone, her thumb frozen above the screen. The message had come from an unknown number, but the words were chilling in their precision. "I have more recordings. Meet me at the campus coffee shop in 20 minutes if you want to know the truth. Come alone." She showed the text to Elon, who was standing beside her in President Wilson's office. His expression hardened as he read it. "That's either a whistleblower," he muttered, "or a trap." President Wilson leaned forward across her desk. "Absolutely not. You are not going alone. This entire situation is spiraling out of control." "I agree," Linda replied. "But if someone really does have recordings, we need to know. It could explain how this all started. The articles, the photos, the leaks." Elon folded his arms, thinking fast. "Fine, you go. But I'll be watching, from a distance. I'll sit close, stay hidden. If anything feels off, I'll intervene." President Wilson sighed. "I still think this is reckless." "Maybe," Linda said, "but not going could be worse." 20 minutes later, the air in the campus coffee shop buzzed with soft conversation and clinking cups. Linda walked in, scanning the tables. Students looked up, whispered, clearly recognizing her. Ever since the viral lecture incident, she could feel the shift. Eyes lingered, phones pointed. She no longer had the luxury of anonymity. She spotted a young woman in the back corner with short brown hair and a camera bag. It was Tara Chen, a quiet student from her class, always seated in the last row, always watching. Now, she raised her hand slightly in invitation. Linda approached slowly. "Tara?" The student nodded. "Thanks for coming, Professor. I wasn't sure you would. Let's just say I'm running out of reasons not to," Lyndon replied, sliding into the seat across from her. "You said you had recordings?" Tara nodded and opened her backpack, pulling out a small black drone and her phone. "I've been following you and Mr. Musk since yesterday. I'm a reporter for the university paper." What started as a curiosity turned into something bigger. Linda's heart sank. You've been spying on us? I prefer to call it journalism, Tara said without apology. And trust me, it's a good thing I did, because I think there's something you need to see. She tapped her phone and turned the screen toward Linda. A grainy video played. Elon, earlier that morning before the lecture, standing outside the engineering building. He was talking to a man in a dark blazer. Linda leaned in. The man looked familiar. Then it clicked. "That's Dean Victor Hammond," she whispered, "from the engineering department. We've served on multiple academic panels." Tara nodded. They spoke for almost 15 minutes, then exchanged papers. "What kind of papers?" Linda asked, her voice tight. "I couldn't hear what was said, but I filmed it all." At that moment, Elon entered the coffee shop, wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He spotted them, walked casually past, then doubled back and sat at a nearby table, close enough to listen. Linda waved him over. "We need you in on this." Elon approached and glanced at the phone. "That's Hammond," he confirmed. "That's who I met this morning. He said he was showing his daughter the campus. She was supposedly considering a STEM scholarship." "And the documents?" Linda asked. Elon thought. "Patent release forms, or so I was told. I signed them in good faith." Tara leaned in. "You don't find it odd that the dean of engineering just happens to run into Elon Musk on campus the exact morning this all exploded?" Linda's mind raced. "So you think, what, that this whole thing was orchestrated?" Tara hesitated, then said, "I think someone wanted you two in the same room. Someone who knew both your strengths. Someone who wanted you to collide. For a reason." It was a terrifying thought. Linda leaned back in her chair. "But why?" Tara shook her head. "That's the part I haven't figured out yet. But I think Dean Hammond is at the center of it." Suddenly the pieces began to align. Hammond's unexpected presence, his past interest in Linda's unpublished carbon flow models, his political connections, and now his proximity to Elon. "We need to talk to him," Linda said. "Not yet," Elon cautioned. "If he's involved in something deeper, we don't want to tip our hand. We need proof." Tara held up her phone. "You've got me. I'll keep watching him, tracking what I can. But be careful if he suspects he's being followed." Linda's thoughts churned. "What if we set a trap?" Elon raised an eyebrow. "Go on." "We feed Hammond information. A prototype project. Something built around my equations. Something so valuable, he won't be able to resist passing it along. And when it leaks," Elon finished, "we'll know where the leak came from." Linda nodded. "It's time we turned the tables." Tara smirked. "You two make a scary good team." Elon and Linda exchanged a glance, uncertain allies in a game far bigger than they'd imagined. Neither knew that the next move would reveal a secret so massive it could shake the foundations of academia, technology, and national security. And it had already begun. By the time dusk fell over the Bay Area, the plan was in motion. Professor Linda Martinez sat at her office desk with practiced calm, though her pulse betrayed the storm inside. She had spent the last few hours preparing a carefully engineered decoy file titled Project Atmosphere, Martian Atmospheric Adaptation Framework. A legitimate-looking document peppered with just enough technical jargon to sound revolutionary, but embedded with subtle mathematical flaws only she and Elon Musk would recognize. Every paragraph was a baited hook. On her shelf, just above a dusty row of awards, a discreet microcamera watched the room from a hidden crevice in a physics textbook. Elon's security chief, Mike Jenkins, had rigged the office with surveillance equipment and tracking devices. "We're not just catching a rat," he had said, "we're catching who feeds it." At precisely 3:47 p.m., a polite knock came at the door. Linda didn't flinch. She opened it to find Professor Victor Hammond, the same calm expression he always wore now laced with a subtle tension. He stepped inside, a leather-bound notebook tucked under his arm. "Linda," he greeted smoothly. "You said you had a breakthrough?" She gestured to the chair across from her. "Yes. It's unexpected." A new approach to modeling atmospheric turbulence for extraterrestrial applications, Mars specifically. Hammond's brow lifted slightly. Ah, that's quite a leap. I didn't make it alone, Linda replied evenly. I've been collaborating with Mr. Musk. At the mention of Elon's name, a flicker crossed Hammond's face, barely perceptible, but there. Has resources I don't, she continued. Access to simulations, to test environments, to people who can take equations and turn them into systems. Indeed, Hammond murmured, crossing one leg over the other. Elon Musk is ambitious. Linda tapped the folder on her desk. I prepared a brief for internal sharing. You're the only faculty member I trust enough to review it. It's confidential, of course. She watched as he leaned forward, reaching for the folder with the kind of hunger he rarely showed during departmental meetings. He opened it, his eyes scanning rapidly. For a moment, Linda felt the room tilt. Watching not a colleague, but a collector assessing a rare artifact. Fascinating, he said at last. The fluid dynamic modeling is complex, very advanced. Who developed the error correction matrix? I did, Linda answered, her voice steady. But Elon caught a key redundancy in the tertiary layer. We've refined it together. Hammond nodded absently, already fixated on a chart. You said this is purely theoretical? For now, Linda replied. But the applications are vast. He closed the folder with a soft click. May I take this with me? Of course, she said, hiding the twist in her gut. But please, discretion is critical. Always, Hammond said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You've done brilliant work, Linda. You should be proud. She thanked him and walked him to the door. As he stepped into the hallway, Linda forced a calm expression, even as her knees nearly buckled from the pressure. The moment the door shut, she turned to the bookshelf. Elon, she said softly. From a small speaker beneath the shelf, Elon's voice came through. We got everything, facial reaction, voice pattern, the moment he asked to take the file. Jenkins is already tailing him. Linda exhaled, her whole body sagging with the relief of someone who just stepped off a tightrope. An hour later, in the back of a dark surveillance van parked discreetly on a residential street, Mike Jenkins watched a blinking dot move across a digital campus map. He's heading west, out of the university. Elon leaned over his shoulder. Toward the consulate? Bingo, Mike said. There's a diplomatic reception at the Russian consulate tonight. Hammond's name was recently added to the guest list. Elon exchanged a look with Linda, who had joined them after dark, dressed in a black blouse and blazer that made her look more like a visiting dignitary than a math professor caught in a web of espionage. If he hands off that document, she said quietly, we'll have our proof. And if he's really connected to Petrov, Elon added, we'll know this is more than just stolen research. This is international. Mike tapped his screen. Our best move is to be inside. Elon, you're still on the consulate's invitation list. You were scheduled to speak there next month. I can get you in as a guest. Linda, you'll need a cover. Linda hesitated. I'm not a spy. No, Elon said. You're something better. You're the reason they're interested in the first place. You walk through that door, and you'll be the one thing they never expected, a trap they thought they set, setting them up. That night, under glittering chandeliers and the eyes of a dozen watchful agents, Linda and Elon entered the lion's den. Neither of them knew how far the web stretched, but they were no longer just reacting, they were hunting. And what they found next would shake them both. The consulate was awash in soft golden light, the kind of opulence designed to disarm. Crystal chandeliers dripped elegance over silk-covered walls, and the air buzzed with the clink of glasses, hushed conversations in multiple languages, and the low hum of a string quartet playing near the marble staircase. But beneath the polished civility was a different rhythm, one Linda Martinez could feel vibrating beneath her skin. This wasn't just a diplomatic reception, it was a theater. And someone here had been pulling strings for months. Elon Musk, in a dark, tailored suit that made him look more like a statesman than an engineer, stood beside her. There's Petrov, he said under his breath, nodding toward a tall man with sharp features, sipping vodka near the edge of a painting of the Ural Mountains. Linda's eyes tracked Victor Hammond, who had just slipped into the room like a man who belonged. He looked calm, comfortable. Too comfortable. He spotted Petrov and walked straight toward him, folder tucked under his arm. The same folder she had handed him earlier. "This is it," Elon whispered. "Watch for the handoff." But what happened next wasn't what they expected. Hammond reached Petrov and, without even removing the folder, tapped it lightly, then whispered something in his ear. Petrov's expression shifted ever so slightly before he nodded, took a sip of his drink, and turned away. No physical exchange, no theatrical pass of the folder. It was subtler than that. A confirmation, a coded signal. Suddenly Linda understood. The handoff wasn't the folder. It was the knowledge. The mathematical framework, already uploaded, already delivered digitally, was simply being acknowledged here, ceremonially. Elon's jaw tightened. That means they already have it. Before either of them could act, two men in suits moved quietly through the crowd and intercepted Hammond and Petrov. The room didn't erupt in chaos, not yet, but tension spiked like a string pulled taut. One of the men leaned close, whispered something to Hammond, and then revealed a badge. FBI. Linda blinked. The trap had already been sprung. Agent Wilson appeared moments later, professional but grim. He nodded once to Elon, then to Linda, and gestured for them to follow. In a private back room of the consulate, they were joined by Petrov, now expressionless, and Hammond, who looked like a man realizing the ground had shifted beneath him. "You've been under surveillance for 3 months, Dr. Hammond," Agent Wilson said calmly. "Tonight confirms everything. The coded file, the correspondence, your meeting with a known intelligence asset of a foreign power." "I'm an academic," Hammond said smoothly, but the crack in his voice betrayed him. "I shared nothing more than public research." Linda stepped forward, eyes blazing. "You accessed my unpublished drafts. You cited my early work before it was even released. You offered to broker deals behind my back. That isn't academic collaboration, that's betrayal." "You don't understand," Hammond snapped, suddenly defensive. "This isn't about politics, it's about progress. Real-world application. Your equations could revolutionize systems, not just for Mars, but here, on Earth. Military filtration, subterranean climate control. Do you realize the scale of what you've created?" Linda's voice was ice. "I didn't create this to be weaponized." Petrov, silent until now, finally spoke. His accent was soft but sharp, like glass under velvet. "Genius can't be owned, Professor. Once ideas are born, they find their path, whether you like it or not." Elon's gaze narrowed. "Except when they're stolen." Wilson nodded to his agents, who stepped forward to escort the men out. Hammond didn't resist. He simply looked at Linda one last time. "You'll thank me one day," he muttered. "When your work changes the world in ways you never imagined." The door shut behind him. Silence fell. But Linda's mind was already elsewhere, back in her notebook, on the patterns that had started it all. She looked at Elon. "There's something about those equations I haven't told you. A pattern that keeps appearing. At first I thought it was just mathematical coincidence, but now I'm not so sure." Elon looked intrigued. "A pattern?" "Yes. One that appears in turbulence modeling, carbon flow, and even space radiation patterns. It's consistent, but buried. Almost like a signature," Elon finished, his eyes slowly widening. Linda nodded slowly. "But whose?" In that quiet room, far from the prying eyes of reporters and digital conspiracies, the two of them stared at the only thing that mattered now. A mystery written in mathematics, etched into the very fabric of the universe. They had survived espionage, but now they were on the edge of something deeper, something that would change not just their futures, but humanity's place in the cosmos. The following morning, sunlight poured into the SpaceX lab's reinforced glass windows, but inside, the atmosphere felt more like a command center than a research facility. Linda Martinez stood before a whiteboard covered in complex equations, still processing everything that had transpired in the last 72 hours. International espionage, mathematical betrayal, and the quiet horror of seeing her own life's work nearly co-opted for destructive ends. It had all happened so fast, and yet, here she was, still standing, still thinking, still searching. Elon Musk entered the room silently, holding 2 cups of coffee. One black, one just the way Linda liked it, with a splash of oat milk and a dash of cinnamon. He set it down beside her without a word. The whiteboard between them was covered in swirling numbers, equations built from turbulent flow models, carbon saturation thresholds, and interplanetary gas dispersion predictions. But in the lower left corner was something different. Something no one had noticed until now. A recurring sequence, elegant, subtle. Too perfect to be random. "Have you figured it out yet?" Elon asked softly. Linda didn't answer at first. Her fingers hovered in the air as if touching invisible connections. "It's a fractal signature. At first, I thought it was a mere artifact of the model, a side effect of the layered equations. But the deeper I go, the clearer it becomes. This sequence isn't just embedded in the calculations, it's fundamental to them. It repeats no matter the variables." Elon nodded, staring at the numbers. "I've seen it too, in different simulations, not just in your equations but in ones we use for orbital drift prediction, radiation flux, even in the raw data from Martian atmosphere probes." Linda turned toward him slowly. "Are you saying the sequence, it's real? Like part of the physical universe?" He didn't blink. "I'm saying it may be the universe." A hush fell between them. Not silence. No, the lab still hummed with the faint thrum of machines, the ticking of clocks, the distant sound of boots on concrete, but a mental silence, as if even the equations were holding their breath. Linda moved back to the board and extended the sequence. She sketched a visual representation, a geometric form, spiraling inward and outward, infinitely recursive. It was eerily similar to known fractals, but with a twist, a higher symmetry, a logic that hinted at something far greater than pure math. "I thought this was coincidence," she whispered. "But this feels intentional." "You're thinking what I'm thinking, aren't you?" Elon's voice was low, serious. "That someone or something encoded this into the framework of reality," she said, "long before humans ever put pencil to paper." They stood together before the board, transfixed. Then, almost reluctantly, Linda flipped to a new page in her notebook. She began listing the natural constants that intersected with the pattern. Pi, Euler's number, the golden ratio, all linked, all touched by the same unseen thread. Elon turned to his laptop and pulled up data sets from SpaceX deep space sensors, readings from probes circling Mars, data packets from the James Webb Relay satellites, even raw ion flux from the solar winds. He overlaid them with Linda's fractal, a perfect match. "This isn't just a mathematical phenomenon," he murmured. "It's a message." Linda leaned forward. "Or a framework, a blueprint." They exchanged a long glance, the kind of look shared only between minds on the cusp of something historic. "But if that's true," she said, her voice almost breaking from awe, "then whoever, or whatever, put this pattern here, did so with the expectation that we'd eventually find it," Elon finished. They stood frozen, the magnitude of it all pressing down. The idea that buried within the fabric of reality was a design, an intentional structure, placed not by chance, but by some force far older, wiser, and more patient than humankind. A knock at the door startled them. Samantha Wells stepped inside, holding a tablet. Her face was pale. "You need to see this," she said. She handed the tablet to Elon, who scanned the screen. Linda leaned in. It was a live video feed from a European science station, one that had just completed an atmospheric analysis of a newly discovered exoplanet. The data displayed the same pattern. Identical. "It's not just here," Elon said, eyes wide. "It's everywhere." Linda felt her knees weaken. She gripped the edge of the table. This changes everything, not just for science, for philosophy, for humanity." Samantha whispered, "What does it mean?" Elon closed his laptop and looked at both women. "It means we've been speaking the language of the universe without even knowing it. And now, the universe is answering back." Linda gazed back at the board, where the spiral danced across the white surface like a fingerprint from the stars. For the first time in her career, numbers didn't just make sense, they felt sacred. This wasn't the end of a story. It was the beginning of something far bigger. What began as a lecture meant to dismantle a myth ended up revealing a much deeper truth about people, about assumptions, and about the extraordinary potential that often lies just beneath the surface. Professor Linda Martinez thought she was exposing a tech mogul's supposed privilege. Instead, she encountered a mind as sharp and relentless as her own. But more than that, she uncovered something far greater, a shared passion for truth, for mathematics, and for solving problems that could change the world. This wasn't just about proving who could solve an equation faster. It was about challenging long-held beliefs, about the power of listening, questioning, and being willing to see someone and something in a completely new light. In today's world, we're too quick to judge based on appearances, status, or even reputation. But as this inspiring story shows, real genius isn't always loud. Sometimes it sits quietly in the back of the classroom. And sometimes, the most unexpected encounters lead to the most profound discoveries. Linda and Elon's journey reminds us that collaboration between seemingly opposite worlds, academia and industry, theory and practice, skepticism and ambition, can result in breakthroughs we never imagined. It's a call to all of us to remain curious, to stay humble, and to never stop learning. Because when two brilliant minds meet not in conflict, but in conversation, they don't just solve problems, they unlock new dimensions of possibility. If this story moved you, if it made you think differently about success, science, or human connection, then don't keep it to yourself. Click the like button, subscribe to the channel so you never miss another inspiring story, and share this video with someone who needs a reminder that the universe might just be speaking to us in numbers. And who knows? The next mind-bending revelation could be sitting right beside you, quiet, underestimated, and waiting for their moment to shine. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.